My name is Ivy Hart. I'm 31 years old, and the day a steel sign crashed down on me outside a co-working lot, my world went silent. The doctors called it temporary hearing loss. To me, it felt like being buried alive in cotton. For weeks, I moved through the house like a ghost lips, moving hands, gesturing, pretending I understood. Everyone thought I was broken, helpless. That night, standing by the staircase, I heard again. Not a miracle choir, not birds in the trees, just voices. My husband's voice, my sister-in-law's voice. Their words cut sharper than any shard of glass. "She hasn't signed yet," Elise whispered, ice in her tone. "If she never hears again, it'll be easier." My heart slammed against my ribs. I wasn't supposed to hear that. According to them, I was still trapped in silence. According to them, I was safe to deceive. I pressed my back against the wallpaper rough against my skin. My fingers trembled, but my mind locked onto one truth: they wanted the house. My mother's house. The inheritance she left me. Little did they know I was listening, and I wasn't going to stay silent forever. They thought I was deaf, lost in silence. What they didn't know was that my hearing had returned 2 days earlier, and I had chosen not to tell a soul. I wanted to see who they really were when they believed I couldn't hear them. Every whisper, every scheme, every cruel laugh, I caught it all. If you were me, would you confront them right away or stay quiet, collecting proof until the moment was right? Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. I grew up on an island that smelled like wet cedar and low tide. Bainbridge wasn't glamorous. It was fairy horns at dawn, gulls arguing over French fries, the slap of water against pilings, and a house that always sounded like it was breathing. Our farmhouse sat back from the road behind a line of firs, the porch paint chipped in a way that made photographs look nostalgic even when you were living them. The floorboards groaned like old men clearing their throats. In the summer, the screen door hummed with mosquitoes. In the winter, the wood stove sang and everything else went quiet. If you've ever lived with a house long enough, you know it becomes a kind of relative difficult particular, but yours. My mother kept everything labeled. She kept nails in marmalade jars, receipts in manila folders, and feelings in a tight smile she'd relax only when she thought no one was watching. On Saturday mornings, she'd spread county maps on the table and smooth the paper with the side of her hand like a ritual. I learned to press rulers straight to crease things clean, to write dates in the top right corner and circle them twice. The kitchen always smelled like coffee and pencil shavings. She'd nod at me over her mug and say, "Good lines matter, Ivy." Good lines are how you make sense of a thing before it tries to tangle you. When I say I understand property law a little, what I mean is, I learned it the way kids pick up a second language they don't realize they're learning. My mother worked part-time at a title office back when papers still had weight, and the copier made a sound like waves. She processed deeds and easements the way other mothers packed lunches. Ownership, she told me one night, tapping a paragraph with her nail lives here in the clauses people skim. She smiled, but her eyes were tired in a way I'd only understand years later. Never sign anything you can't explain to yourself with the lights off. We didn't have much money. We had groceries paid for in cash and sweaters repaired with little neat squares you could spot if you knew where to look. What we did have was the house free and clear after my grandfather died, plus a savings account she called the Roots. It was in my name from the time I was 10. She took me to the bank, made me shake hands with the manager, let me sign in a blank where my name looked too careful. She did it so I'd learn the weight of my own handwriting. Outside, the rain made chalk rivers along the curb. She opened a tiny umbrella with ladybugs on it, laughed when wind flipped it inside out, and said, "Keep the house. Keep your name. The rest is weather." The ferry to Seattle was a floating classroom. We'd lean on the rail and count cranes along the docks, or sit inside with paper cups of cocoa too hot to drink. I sketched buildings on napkins that stuck to my hand with condensation. The city looked like a promised steel ribs glass lungs, all of it humming. Architecture wasn't a choice so much as a direction I kept walking. I loved how a floor plan could look like a solved equation. I loved the click of a mechanical pencil when the lead extended just right, the soft sound it made turning a corner. On those rides, my mother would talk about nothing and everything. She'd point out a roof line and ask how I'd fix the drainage. She'd ask who I wanted to become and listen like my answer mattered more than anything. When we docked, a bell would ring and people would stand in unison, the whole boat shifting like a beast waking up. I met Ethan at a charity spin class I didn't want to attend. A friend dragged me because she had free passes and a crush on the instructor. The studio smelled like eucalyptus and determination. Lights pulsed in blues and pinks. A row of men in tank tops pretended not to watch themselves in the mirrors. Ethan wasn't the instructor. He was the man who refilled water stations and joked with people like they'd been friends for years. He had a careful kind of smile, the kind that made you feel chosen for the length of it. He fixed the wobble on my bike as if it mattered, then asked if I liked the playlist. I told him the beat was a little aggressive. He laughed and said I can adjust intensity. He said it like a promise. He was warm at first in a way that didn't feel like performance. He remembered that I hated cinnamon. He learned the route to my apartment and never made me feel guilty for taking the long way home. He asked about my models not to be polite, but because he liked seeing my hands moving as I talked. On nights I worked late at the firm, he'd show up with takeout and sit while I cut foam core until the apartment floor looked like it had snowed. He held pieces while the glue set and told stories about the clients at the studio who measured their worth in numbers that didn't sound like bodies at all. People are complicated, he'd shrug. They want something they can count. He introduced me to his sister the way someone brings home a wine they're not sure you'll like, but think you should try. Elise met me with a handshake that was technically warm and effectively chilly. She wore navy the way some people wear armor. Her hair didn't move when she turned her head. At dinner, she asked precise questions like a performance review had swallowed a social occasion. She wanted to know my 5-year plan. I told her the truth. I wanted to build houses that felt like handshakes, firm, kind, familiar. She smiled like that wasn't a revenue stream. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I heard her say, "She seems earnest." Ethan answered something I couldn't make out. When I returned, Elise asked me to pass the salt as if nothing were wrong at all. The day Ethan proposed, the air tasted like metal from the rain. He took me to Gasworks Park, where the city lays itself out like it's trying to convince you it's beautiful. He brought a thermos of coffee and a ring that looked like it belonged to the life I hadn't admitted I wanted. He was nervous in a way that made the question feel honest. "Marry me?" he said, rubbing his thumb over my knuckles like he was polishing the words. "We make sense." I said yes because love felt less like fireworks and more like a door you didn't realize had been unlocked for you the whole time. Our engagement party happened in a room with bad lighting and better intentions. Elise booked a private space with linen napkins that scratched like they were doing you a favor. People toasted. People said we were perfect in ways that made me want to check the floor for cracks. Elise clinked her glass and did a little speech about family. She used the word legacy 3 times. When she hugged me afterward, she whispered, "Welcome to the Hearts," and it sounded less like an invitation and more like terms and conditions. I would be lying if I said I didn't notice the differences then. The Hearts had a vocabulary built from schools and seasons and donations. They didn't brag. They arranged facts in a way that made bragging unnecessary. My mother sent me a card with a $100 bill pressed inside and a handwritten recipe for a lemon cake that always collapsed in the middle. I cried in the bathroom and told myself it was because I was happy. The truth was bigger than that and harder to name. We found a narrow townhouse in Capitol Hill with staircases that turned sharply like the house wanted to keep secrets between floors. It had an old window in the bedroom that let in more streetlight than it should. We painted the smallest room a color that looked like the inside of a salt shaker. Ethan called it cloud. I called it almost. We learned each other's morning sounds. The kettle, the shower, the way he cleared his throat before saying something he hoped I'd agree with. We joked about starting a jar for every time he said optimization. We were careful with money in the way couples are when they're trying to be grown-ups about it. He said the studio was expanding. He said opportunity always looks like risk if you stare at it too long. My mother died on a Tuesday, which is a mean day to do something so permanent. Cancer. The word still tastes like rust. She called me the night before to ask if I had enough firewood on the island and whether I was eating anything green. She spoke like she had an infinite supply of evenings left. Her will was straightforward in the way she'd taught me to be. The house came to me along with a letter that wasn't formal at all. She wrote it on lined paper pulled from a notebook that still smelled a little like cardboard. "You will be tempted to trade certainty for comfort," it said in her slanted hand. "Don't. Keep the house. Keep your signature yours. The rest is weather." I read that letter in the living room with the kettle clicking cool behind me. The air felt thin around my ribs. Ethan held me like he meant it. He made tea and couldn't find the honey and kept opening the same cupboard as if it might accept a new answer if he was polite enough. He said the right things. He plans when he's scared. That's something I should have loved about him, and I did for a while. He wanted to talk about maintenance schedules and ferry costs and property taxes. I wanted to sit with memory until it settled somewhere that didn't feel like drowning. On the island after the funeral, I walked the porch and the floorboards talked back. I could still hear my mother moving through the kitchen, drying a glass, the little tap of her ring against the rim. I lay on the old porch swing and let it complain under my weight. On the ceiling, the paint peeled in shapes that looked like countries. I put my hand on the railing and felt splinters catch my skin like a reminder to pay attention. The neighbor's dog barked at a deer, and then nothing moved for a long time. The house didn't require me to be brave. It just required me to be there. Elise came to the island a week later with paper lilies in a vase that smelled like glue. She stood in the doorway without stepping in and said, "This is sweet." She pronounced sweet like it meant small. She asked if I had a plan for optimizing the asset. I said I was grieving. She widened her eyes like I'd made a joke she didn't get. "Of course," she said. "Just time-sensitive choices have a way of making themselves." When she placed the vase on the counter, she wiped her fingers on a tissue like the house had left a residue on her. I didn't know it then, but the signatures I kept safe in a folder with my mother's letter would become the exact signatures someone would try to take. I didn't know that the house that breathed like a person would need me to defend it like one. If you've ever stood in a room and felt its history press lightly against your shoulder, you know how a place can ask you not to go. I didn't realize how quickly silence could move in after grief. After the funeral, after people carried away plates of food and folded chairs after the ferry pulled out with the last well-wishers, the quiet set in like fog. Ethan stayed on the island for a few days, then said the studio needed him back. I told him I was fine alone. I wasn't, but I wanted to believe it. The house had a way of making solitude look like strength. At night, though, when the pipes ticked and the trees scraped the siding, it felt less like strength and more like abandonment. We returned to the townhouse in Seattle, and that's when the first cracks widened. Ethan busied himself with expansion's strategic partnerships, words that sounded borrowed from Elise's vocabulary. He came home late, sometimes smelling like someone else's cologne, sometimes with receipts for dinners that had more zeros than we should have been spending. I asked questions. He smiled, kissed my forehead, told me I worried too much. It was the same smile that once meant comfort. Now it meant don't look too closely. Elise inserted herself more boldly after my mother's death. She'd text Ethan at odd hours, and he'd tilt his phone away when I walked in. When I asked, he said she was just helping with financial planning. Her words bled into our home through him: optimization, leverage, liquidity. Our conversations began to sound like quarterly reports. Once, when I mentioned fixing the leaky window in the bedroom, Ethan replied, "Let's not allocate resources there yet." He caught himself and laughed. But I didn't. I heard Elise in his voice, and it chilled me. Still, there were tender moments I clung to. A Saturday morning when he brought me coffee in bed and tickled my toes. A night when he traced the outline of my hand with his finger like he was memorizing me again. These moments were scraps, and I devoured them because I was starving for the version of him I'd first loved. It's embarrassing how little it takes to keep hope alive when you don't want to face the alternative. The accident happened on a gray afternoon rain, hanging heavy in the air without falling. I had stayed late at a co-working space, reviewing plans for a modest community center. I remember walking across the parking lot juggling blueprints when a gust of wind shoved a loose steel sign from its bolts. The edge caught me above the ear, and everything snapped into blur. I woke under fluorescent lights, the room swimming in antiseptic smell. A nurse leaned over me, lips moving. No sound. Nothing. The silence was so absolute it roared. They called it temporary sensorineural hearing loss. They said recovery could take days, weeks, maybe never. Ethan sat by my bed, holding my hand, mouthing words slowly, eyes wide like he was promising the universe he'd never let go. He scribbled, "I love you" on a sticky note and pressed it into my palm. I cried both because I believed him and because I didn't know how to live in a world where language had been stripped away overnight. At home, the world rearranged itself. He downloaded an app that transcribed his voice to text, at least at first. He used sticky notes on the fridge, brief sentences that felt like lifelines. But within weeks, the notes stopped appearing. The app gathered digital dust. He'd talk with his back turned, and when I tapped his shoulder, he'd sigh a sound I couldn't hear but could feel in the slump of his shoulders. The man who once traced my hand now tapped impatiently at the counter while I tried to read his lips. Elise visited more often, bearing pastries I couldn't taste properly and questions I couldn't answer fast enough. She spoke too quickly, her lips a blur. When I shook my head, she'd smile with pity sharpened into something cruel. "It must be exhausting for you," she said once, eyes sliding toward Ethan. "For both of you." She pretended to mean well, but her glance made it clear she was weighing me like an asset losing value. I kept a notebook. At first, it was to practice lip-reading scribbling phrases I thought I saw, but it became something else, an archive of the small betrayals that added up. Wednesday, Ethan on phone, laughing. Couldn't hear words, but face alive. Friday, Elise mentioned timeline when she thought I wasn't watching. Monday, Ethan left phone, face down again, messages from E. I recorded it all, not knowing yet why only that I had to. One night, I caught a look between them across the dinner table. Elise had dropped by just to check in. She poured herself wine without asking, leaned back, asked Ethan about next steps. He nodded, glancing at me, then quickly looked away. My stomach twisted. I couldn't catch every word, but I read enough sign estate account. Words that belonged to my mother, not to them. I smiled tightly, excused myself, and shut the bedroom door with hands shaking. Have you ever sat in a room knowing people outside it are planning your erasure? That's what it felt like my life was a document and they were redlining it, removing what mattered most. I pressed my notebook open, underlined the word sign until the paper nearly tore. My mother's warning echoed, "Never sign anything you can't explain to yourself with the lights off." I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. But I knew for the first time that something rotten was moving under our roof. Ethan's tenderness thinned out further. His touches grew absent-minded, his smile polite. He began leaving earlier, returning later. He'd murmur something to Elise in the hallway when they thought I couldn't read it. My heart kept breaking in increments so small they almost passed unnoticed. I told myself he was stressed, pressured by the studio, by debt, by responsibility. But deep down, I knew. I just wasn't brave enough to name it. The last straw came weeks after the accident. Elise came over in a red coat that glared against our beige walls. She sat across from me, legs crossed, coffee steaming in her hand. She turned her head slightly away and muttered, lips curling, "She's just furniture now." I read it as clearly as if it were etched into stone. My chest hollowed. I kept my face, still refused her the satisfaction of reaction. Ethan walked in minutes later, and she beamed at him, voice turning honey-sweet. I wondered if he noticed the switch. I wondered if he cared. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the shadows of passing cars. The silence pressed on me like a weight heavier than the accident, heavier than grief. But somewhere in that suffocating quiet, a thought sparked. Maybe silence wasn't weakness. Maybe it could be a weapon. I didn't know yet how. But I wrote it down in my notebook, underlined it twice. A seed planted in the dark. I didn't know it then, but the seed would grow into the plan that changed everything. The same plan that would force me to play deaf even after sound returned. The same plan that would bring us to the office of a notary with documents Elise thought she controlled and evidence she never saw coming. The weeks blurred into a rhythm of half-truths and staged kindness. Ethan kissed my forehead when he left for work, but his eyes slid away too quickly. Elise stopped knocking before entering, drifting through our townhouse like it already belonged to her. She stacked envelopes on the counter documents to review her handwriting, neat her smile tighter each time I ignored them. I remember one Sunday afternoon most clearly. Rain stitched against the windows, the air thick with the smell of old coffee. Ethan sat with his laptop, jaw tense, shoulders curled in as if the screen might swallow him. Elise paced phone pressed to her ear, her heels clicking sharp as accusations. I sat on the couch with my notebook pretending to doodle heart-pounding. Elise ended the call, dropped into a chair and said, "The valuation's ready." She glanced at me, lowered her voice. "It's 30% below market. He'll push it through fast." Ethan rubbed his temples. "She's not signing yet." "She will," Elise snapped, then smiled at me, sugar melting over poison. "We'll make it easy." I gripped my pen until the ink bled. Easy. That word stung worse than anything. Easy meant taking what was mine because they believed I couldn't stop them. Easy meant erasing my mother's voice, her letter, her warning. I wanted to scream. Instead, I lowered my gaze, wrote in the margin, "They think I'm easy. Prove them wrong." It was around then that Serena reappeared. Serena Vale, the ex who once called me plain in a cocktail dress I'd spent 2 paychecks on. I saw her name on Ethan's phone, half-hidden, scrolled quickly past. Later that week, she posted a photo of a latte at a cafe 2 blocks from our house. My stomach tightened. Coincidence, maybe, but her caption, "Some secrets taste sweeter," made bile rise in my throat. I watched Ethan that night across the dinner table. He chewed, slowly, glanced at his phone. Twice, smiled faintly at something unseen. I stabbed a piece of broccoli and pretended not to notice. My mind twisted in loops. Was it her? Was it Elise feeding me another illusion I didn't know? I only knew the walls felt closer, the silence heavier. I began visiting the Bainbridge house more often. The ferry became my confession booth. Standing on the deck, I let the wind slap my face, carrying whispers I couldn't say aloud. On the island, the air smelled of pine needles and damp soil. Inside the house, I'd sit at the dining table with my mother's letter unfolded in front of me. Her handwriting slanted but steady. "Don't trade certainty for comfort. Keep the house. Keep your name." I traced each word with my finger until the paper grew soft. One evening, Naomi Brooks, my neighbor, knocked on the farmhouse door. She carried soup in a chipped mug and a smile that felt unpolished real. Naomi was a part-time interpreter, someone I'd hired once during a community meeting years before. She signed hello, slowly, carefully, her fingers deliberate so I could follow. Relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen, not just pitied. We sat on the porch swing, soup steaming between us. I scribbled in my notebook, "They're planning something." Naomi frowned, signed back, "Be careful." Her hands moved like wings. She didn't ask for details. She didn't push. She just sat with me in the creaking silence, the kind of silence that doesn't suffocate. When she left, the swing kept swaying, and I realized how rare it was to feel safe with anyone anymore. Back in Seattle, Ethan's detachment grew sharper. One night, I woke to find him gone from bed. I padded to the living room and saw him on the couch phone, close to his face, whispering. His smile glowed in the dim light, free and unguarded. I caught fragments from his lips she doesn't know. I missed this. My chest hollowed. He noticed me in the doorway, froze, then forced a different smile. "Work stuff," he mouthed. I nodded, turned back to the bedroom, but inside, something cracked. Elise's cruelty sharpened too. She arrived one morning with croissants butter-rich and heavy in a box. She set them on the counter, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "If I were you, I'd be ashamed." Her voice dripped contempt, but her lips formed each word slowly, deliberately, as if daring me to read them. I did, and I smiled back, refusing to flinch. That night, I wrote in my notebook a shamed no, waiting. The storm inside me built until it found its breaking point. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Elise and Ethan shut themselves in the study door, nearly closed. I pressed my ear against the wood, though I couldn't hear, not yet. Then I could. The muffled edges of sound seeped through, faint but real. My hearing had begun to return. Their voices sharpened each word, landing like a blade. "She'll sign if we corner her before the next doctor's visit," Elise hissed. "And if she doesn't?" Ethan asked. "Then we find another way. But the clock is ticking." I staggered back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might echo through the walls. They didn't know. They thought I was still deaf, still helpless. But I heard them. For the first time in weeks, the silence had broken, and with it, the illusion I'd been clinging to. I didn't burst in. I didn't shout. I returned to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the truth settle like lead in my lungs. My mother's words repeated in my head, "Never sign anything you can't explain to yourself with the lights off." I realized then I didn't just need to protect the house. I needed to protect myself. From that moment, everything changed. I made a choice they would never know I could hear again. Not yet. I would collect every whisper, every scheme, every careless word they spoke in my silence. And when the time was right, I would use their own voices against them. I wrote it in bold letters across the last page of my notebook, Play Deaf. Gather proof. Strike when ready. The seed planted weeks ago had grown into a plan, and in that plan, silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was my sharpest weapon. The morning after I realized my hearing was back, I practiced the lie. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, lips parted, eyes heavy, tilting my head as if straining to understand nothing. I tapped the side of my ear the way I used to when the silence was real. It felt grotesque, pretending to be weaker than I was, but the mask gave me power. They couldn't steal what they didn't know I had. Ethan walked in while I was still brushing my hair. He said something too low, too casual, then froze, maybe waiting for me to react. I gave him the blank look I had perfected, the one that said, "I didn't catch that." His shoulders dropped in relief. He touched my shoulder lightly, almost absently, and left the room. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Every instinct screamed to confront him, to scream, "I heard you plotting my erasure." But I swallowed it. I needed proof. The proof came in pieces, jagged and bloody, each one cutting me a little more. One evening, I sat curled on the staircase, the wood cold through my thin pajamas. Ethan's voice drifted from the kitchen. He was on the phone, back-turned, voice hushed but clear enough now. "She'll sign soon. Elise says the numbers are lined up." A pause. A laugh softer than I'd heard in months. "Don't worry. She's too naive to suspect." I held my breath until my chest ached. He thought he was safe because my world was supposed to be muted. But I heard every word, and each one etched itself into my ribs. The next day, I checked the printer in Ethan's home office. Paper still warm. My name in black ink above the line marked signature. The document read, "Durable Power of Attorney." My stomach clenched. The words blurred as if the page itself was shaking. This wasn't insurance paperwork. This was ownership stripped and handed to them. I slid the paper back into the tray, careful not to leave it askew. Then I took a photo with my phone. Evidence. Later that week, Elise arrived with croissants again, her heels sharp against the hardwood. She spread folders on the counter, speaking to Ethan while pretending I was a shadow in the corner. "The valuation's low enough now," she said. "He'll take it at a discount, no questions." "We move before her next doctor's appointment?" Ethan nodded, lips pressed. Elise caught my eye and smiled like she'd won a prize no one else wanted. I smiled back, wider, emptier. That night, I played the recording from the door camera. I had forgotten it stored audio, too, at least a few seconds after motion. There they were, Elise's clipped voice, Ethan's hesitant replies. "She won't fight it," Elise insisted. "She can't. We just need her name on the line." The words hissed out of the tiny speaker, but they were clear enough. I saved the file, then backed it up 3 times. My body moved on instinct, gather, copy, protect. I emailed the file to myself, to a hidden account, to a secure drive Naomi had once helped me set up. I slid my mother's letter into a plastic sleeve, tucked it inside a folder labeled Miscellaneous. I was building a fortress one scrap at a time, and yet every time I looked at Ethan, my heart still twisted. I remembered the man who held foam models while glue dried, who laughed at my cinnamon hatred, who kissed me like my mouth was something holy. Was that man ever real, or had he always been this stranger waiting for me to be vulnerable enough to exploit? Serena complicated everything. She appeared again online, her perfectly angled selfies tagged near our neighborhood. A story of wine glasses, 2 filled, 1 lipstick stained. A caption, "Back where I belong." My gut burned. Was she meeting Ethan? Was she part of this conspiracy, or was Elise using her like bait? I wanted to dismiss it, but Ethan's late nights and secret smiles made the image too easy to believe. I followed him once, slipping out after he left with his gym bag. Rain misted against my jacket, the streets slick. He walked 2 blocks, ducked into a cafe. Through the glass, I saw him sit across from Serena. She leaned forward, hand brushing his wrist. He smiled, not the polite one, not the strained one. The real smile. The one I thought belonged only to me. My breath caught. I turned away before he could see me. That night when he returned home, I pretended to be dozing on the couch. He kissed my forehead. I smelled perfume, not mine. I didn't move. I didn't ask. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, "Trust is the first signature they forged." Days later, Giles Mercer arrived. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my wedding when he toasted Ethan with words about carrying legacy forward. He looked older now, his gray hair sharp against his dark suit. He carried a leather portfolio and a smile practiced in the mirror. Sitting across from me, he leaned forward, voice kind, almost grandfatherly. "Ivy, I know this has been difficult. Managing assets can be overwhelming when you're not at full strength. We just want to help. A signature here, a little delegation, and you'll have less to worry about." I nodded blankly, pen hovering over my notebook as if taking notes. He mistook it for docility. Inside, I burned. The way he spoke slow, careful, like I was a child, confirmed everything. They thought silence made me stupid. That night, I replayed his words in my head until they seared. My mother's warning echoed louder. Ownership lives in the clauses people skim. I wasn't skimming anymore. I was dissecting. The weight of the lie pressed harder each day. Pretending to be deaf when my hearing sharpened again made me hyper-aware of every sound, the fridge humming Ethan's keys on the counter, Elise's laughter brittle and high. The ordinary noises of life became weapons. They revealed patterns, moods, alliances. I learned to catalog them the way a spy memorizes footsteps. But each revelation came with pain. I found receipts for a dinner at a steakhouse downtown, signed by Ethan, 2 entrees expensive wine. I traced the ink with my finger, imagining Serena's lipstick on the rim of the glass. I nearly tore the paper apart, but instead I photographed it, tucked it back. Evidence again. One evening, Elise left her laptop open while she went to answer the door. I slipped behind it, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. Her email glowed on the screen. I scanned fast subject lines like asset transfer timeline discount buyer confirmed Mercer drafts. I snapped photos of as many as I could before she returned her heels, announcing her like a metronome of dread. When she saw me near the counter, she smiled, sweet as venom. Later that night in the safety of my bedroom, I zoomed in on one email. Elise had written, "If she resists pressure Ethan to push the sympathy angle. Doctors say recovery is unlikely. We use that." My stomach turned. She wasn't just planning theft. She was weaponizing my body, my condition, my grief. I curled on the bed, clutching my mother's letter, whispering aloud for the first time since my hearing returned, "I hear you, Mom." I hear them too. It wasn't enough to just collect evidence. I needed allies. But who could I trust when even my husband's smile had turned counterfeit? Naomi came to mind. The neighbor who'd brought soup, who signed slowly so I could follow. I knocked on her door the next day, notebook in hand. She let me in without questions, her apartment warm with the smell of tea and old books. I wrote quickly, "They're trying to steal the house. Need help. Keep secret, I can hear again." Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp. Instead, she signed carefully, "We fight." I exhaled, relief flooding through me. I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I sat in bed, Ethan's steady breathing beside me. Elise's perfume still lingering in the air from her visit. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve on fire, and whispered into the dark. They think I'm furniture. They think I'm easy. They think I'm deaf. They're wrong, and for the first time, I believed it. The day Dr. Ruiz called me back in for a checkup, I almost canceled. Walking into her office meant the risk of someone leaking the truth to Ethan or Elise, but I needed her on record. I needed a time-stamped witness that my hearing had returned. The exam room smelled faintly of alcohol wipes and paper gowns. Dr. Ruiz tapped her pen against the clipboard, asked me to repeat words at different volumes. Pineapple. Tuesday. Remember. I answered each one clearly. Her eyebrows arched, then softened into a smile. You've regained your hearing, Ivy. That's wonderful news. I swallowed hard, holding her gaze. Please don't tell my husband yet. Not anyone. I have my reasons. She hesitated, then nodded. It's your information to share. I'll note it in your chart today. Proof. Medical proof. I felt the weight of it like armor settling on my shoulders. Back at home, I slipped silently into the routine of a deaf woman. I let Ethan repeat himself twice, acted confused when Elise rattled off instructions, feigned frustration when Giles explained documents I pretended not to understand. Behind the act, I listened harder than ever. One stormy evening, the printer betrayed them again. Paper jammed mid-page, leaving half a document exposed. I tugged it free, heart-hammering. It was a property transfer agreement Elise's company's name, listed as broker. My name printed neatly at the bottom beside an empty line. Above it, Ethan's shaky signature. My throat closed. He had already signed his half selling what was never his to sell. I slid the paper back into the tray just as Ethan walked in hair damp from the rain. He glanced at me, then at the printer, suspicion flickering across his face. Paper jam, he mouthed. I smiled, shrugged, tapped my ear, pretended I hadn't understood. He relaxed. That smile again, the counterfeit one. I wanted to spit. Later, I met Naomi at the diner near the ferry dock. The place buzzed with low conversation fry oil thick in the air. We slid into a booth near the back. I pushed photos across the table, the POA, drafted the transfer agreement, the receipts. Her hands trembled as she signed. This is bigger than I thought. I wrote, I need a lawyer, someone who won't flinch. She nodded. The next day, she slipped me a card with the name Alexis Monroe. Ruthless reputation. Exactly what I needed. Meeting Alexis felt like stepping onto a different battlefield. Her office was sleek, all glass and chrome, the kind of place that dared you to lie. She studied me across her desk, eyes sharp. So they think you're deaf, she said after I explained, and they've already drafted paperwork to strip you of your estate. I nodded. I want to stop them, but I need to do it clean, legal, unbreakable. She leaned back, smirk tugging at her mouth. Good. You've already done the hard part, collecting evidence without tipping them off. We'll build a case. But you'll have to keep playing along until they show their full hand. Can you handle that? I looked her dead in the eye. They think I'm weak. I can handle anything. Alexis outlined the plan record, gather financials, catch them in an overt attempt. She'd freeze any fraudulent transfers file, civil claims, maybe even criminal if Elise and Giles overstepped. But timing was everything. One wrong move and they'd lawyer up first. The next test came sooner than I expected. Serena. She cornered me outside the grocery store, her perfume cloying, her smile sharp. Ivy, she said, voice lilting. You look better than I expected. I stared at her lips, reading them like text scrolling across a screen. Ethan's been so stressed. You can't blame him for needing a distraction. She laughed, light and cruel. Some secrets taste sweeter. I gripped my shopping bag until the plastic dug into my palm. If she was Elise's pawn, she was doing a good job. But days later, Serena posted a cryptic video online, tears in her eyes, words half-formed about manipulation, money owed being used. I recorded it instantly, a thread unraveling. Then came Malik Ford, the private investigator Alexis recommended. He was blunt professional, smelled faintly of leather and cigarette smoke. Within a week, he handed over a report Elise's company had brokered multiple shady transfers, before always under Giles's supervision, always targeting vulnerable family members. Elise got richer. Giles collected success fees. Victims stayed silent, shamed by their own gullibility. When I read the report, my stomach turned. This wasn't just about me. It was a pattern, a business model built on betrayal. At night, I lay awake next to Ethan, pretending to dream while his breathing rattled steady. My mind flicked through every piece of evidence like cards in a deck. Printer documents, door camera recordings, Dr. Ruiz's chart note, Serena's confession video, Malik's report. My notebook thick with observations, each one a blade, together a weapon. But my heart still betrayed me. One night, Ethan brushed my hair back, whispered something soft. His breath tickled my ear. I miss the old you. I wanted to scream. The old me trusted you. The old me would have signed. Instead, I closed my eyes, let him think I hadn't understood, and counted the beats of his betrayal like seconds on a clock. The final fracture came on a night heavy with rain. Elise and Ethan argued in the study, door cracked just enough. I crept down the hall, every step a gamble. She's dragging her feet, Ethan muttered. Then push her harder, Elise hissed. She's nothing without us. If she never hears again, all the better. She won't even know what she's lost. The words seared through me. That was my Jim Guy. No more doubts, no more clinging to scraps of love. They had named me broken disposable furniture. They didn't know the silence was over. I slipped back to my room, heart pounding with something colder than grief. Resolve. They thought I was deaf, but I heard them, and soon the whole world would too. I stopped waiting for miracles the night I realized I could orchestrate one myself. They wanted me silent. I would weaponize that silence. They wanted me weak. I would let them underestimate me until the trap closed. The first step was control of myself, of the narrative, of the evidence. Each morning I played the part, squinting at lips, shrugging helplessly, tapping my ear with a weary smile. Ethan thought it made me docile. Elise thought it made me easy prey. Behind their backs, I was building an arsenal. Naomi became my anchor. We met at the diner 3 nights in a row, steam rising from chipped mugs, while the jukebox hummed old country songs. I slid photos across the table drafts of the POA Elise's emails receipts Ethan didn't know I'd seen. Naomi's hands moved quick, signing with urgency. This is enough to scare them, not enough to bury them. You need the kill shot. The kill shot. I wrote the words in my notebook, underlined twice. She introduced me formally to Alexis Monroe, who didn't waste time on sympathy. You've been playing dead, Alexis said, leaning across her desk, nails tapping a rhythm of impatience. Good. But now we need them to commit the crime in daylight. Not just in whispers or drafts. We need them cornered, pen in hand, about to steal. That's how we crush them. Her bluntness steadied me. I nodded. Tell me how. First, Malik digs deeper. Elise's company leaves paper trails. Giles never hides his commissions as well as he thinks. We find the threads we pull. Meanwhile, you keep acting deaf. Make them bold. Make them think you're ready to sign. They'll plan a notary meeting. That's where we flip the table. The words lit a fire inside me. For weeks, I'd been suffocating under secrets. Now, the plan gave me oxygen. Malik delivered within days. He slid a folder across Alexis's desk in front of me. She's done this before, he said, voice gravelly. 2 families, 3 transfers, all the same playbook. Vulnerable relative, fake valuation, quick sale. Mercer signed off on everyone. And guess what? Elise's company took a tidy cut. One guy tried to fight back, settled quietly. She thinks she's untouchable. I flipped through the documents, bile rising, as I saw signatures of people who had trusted, who had lost. I thought of my mother, her careful handwriting, her warning about clauses. Rage burned clean through me. Elise wasn't just stealing my house. She was running an industry of betrayal. We planned the counterattack like generals. Alexis mapped timelines, Malik dug into finances. Naomi became my silent courier. My job was patience, something I'd never mastered until now. I practiced every day in front of the mirror. Blank eyes, delayed responses, tilted head. I perfected the art of looking helpless. At night, though, when the mask slipped, I changed into something else entirely. I wore black, sleek, and minimal, walked the creaking floors of Bainbridge like a soldier preparing for war. I read my mother's letter out loud, my voice low but steady. Keep your name. The rest is weather. It became my mantra. Ethan grew more careless the longer I played my role. One morning, he left his phone on the counter while he showered. Notifications lit up messages from E. My chest tightened, expecting Serena. But no, Elise. Line after line. We need her signature before quarter end. Giles says the buyer won't wait. Don't get soft now. I photographed every screen before the phone locked. Later, I stared at the images, the truth carving into me. Not just a betrayal of love, but partnership in theft. My husband and his sister conspiring her words, pulsing across a screen he carried everywhere like a lifeline. That night, he leaned close to me, in bed, brushed hair from my face, whispered, "You'll feel better once it's all handled." He thought I hadn't heard. I nearly choked on my own fury. The closer the walls pressed, the sharper I became. Serena reached out next, unexpected, shaky. She found me outside the courthouse of all places, cornered me with a look that wasn't smug this time. Her eyes rimmed red. I didn't want to. Elise said she'd ruin me if I didn't play along. Her words tumbled like stones. She paid me to distract Ethan, to make you jealous, to hurry you into signing. But I swear nothing happened. He never touched me. I searched her face. For once, she looked human, not polished glass. She shoved her phone at me, hands trembling. Bank transfers, Elise's name, proof. I exhaled slowly. "You just switched sides," I said, voice low. "Call it survival," she muttered. Her confession slid neatly into Alexis's plan. Another blade in the arsenal. We rehearsed the confrontation in Alexis's office like it was theater. Naomi played Elise, Malik played Giles. Alexis walked me through every line, how to feign confusion at the insurance documents, how to pause before signing, how to drop the recording at the exact moment. "You'll let them incriminate themselves," she said. "You'll hold the mirror up and they'll see monsters staring back." At night, I paced the Bainbridge house rehearsing. I could almost feel my mother beside me, her hand guiding mine across imaginary paperwork, whispering, "Good lines matter, Ivy. Good lines are how you make sense of a thing before it tries to tangle you." I thought about Ethan then, not as my husband, not as the man who once glued my models, but as a name under Elise's texts, a half-signature on stolen deeds. Grief twisted inside me, but I hardened it into resolve. Love had been buried with my mother. What remained was duty, rage, clarity. One rainy Thursday, Elise announced it. "We've booked the notary," she said briskly, dropping her coat on the chair like she owned the place. "End of next week. It'll be quick, painless. She just has to sign." Ethan nodded, avoiding my eyes. I tilted my head, blinked pretended confusion. Elise smiled with triumph. They thought victory was within reach. That night, I wrote in my notebook, stage set. "Curtain soon." For the first time since the accident, I slept soundly. The air inside the notary's office smelled of toner and dust, like time itself had been Xeroxed too many times. A wall clock ticked in slow, deliberate strokes. I sat at the long oak table pen, resting between my fingers, body still as stone. On my right, Ethan offered a reassuring smile he hadn't worn in months. On my left, Elise adjusted her blazer, spreading papers with the precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. "Just standard insurance updates," she said smoothly, her voice pitched for the notary's ears. "Nothing complicated." The notary, a thin man with glasses smudged at the corners, nodded politely. His stamp sat on the table like a gavel waiting to fall. Giles Mercer hovered near the end of the table. His leather briefcase unzipped a counselor who pretended impartiality while circling like a vulture. His cologne lingered expensive and sour. Naomi sat behind me, officially assisting as my interpreter. Her eyes flicked to mine, once steady grounding me. Across from her, Alexis Monroe stacked her own folder, neatly, lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She said nothing yet. She was the blade waiting in its sheath. Elise slid the top document toward me. The paper rasped against the wood, louder than it should have been. My name glared back from the page. Line after line of legalese ending in a single blank space, begging for ink. "Sign here," Elise said, tapping the line with a manicured nail. I tilted my head, blinking slowly, playing the part. Naomi signed to me in careful gestures, translating Elise's lie about insurance coverage. I nodded faintly, feigning trust. My hand hovered above the line. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "It's okay, Ivy. I'll explain later." I lowered the pen. The room tightened with expectation. Elise's breath hitched, Giles's fingers flexed, Ethan's knee bounced under the table, and then I stopped. I straightened in my chair, met the notary's eyes, and spoke. "This isn't insurance," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "This is a durable power of attorney. Full financial control. My estate. My house. My name." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan froze, his mouth falling open. Elise's smile cracked like porcelain. Giles blinked, the only sound the faint click of his briefcase snapping shut. The notary looked up, startled. "Is that true?" I turned the page around, pointed to the clause. Section 3. Transfer of all authority regarding property and assets. If I sign this, they own everything my mother left me. Elise's voice sharpened. She doesn't know what she's reading, but Alexis leaned forward, her folder snapping open. Actually, she knows exactly. And so do you. Exhibit A. She slid a printed transcript across the table. Audio recording dated 3 weeks ago, from Ms. Hart's own home security system. You'll hear yourselves discussing how to rush her into signing before her next doctor's appointment. She pressed play on her phone. Elise's voice hissed through the speaker. "She won't fight it. She can't. We just need her name on the line." The notary's eyes widened. Elise lunged forward. "That's inadmissible." Alexis raised a hand. "Not in this context. And there's more." She produced another sheet, Malik's report stamped and signed. Exhibit B. Evidence of fraudulent property valuations coordinated through Elise Hart's financial channels. 30% below market. Buyer affiliated with her own firm. A textbook conflict of interest. Elise's face drained of color. And finally, Alexis said calmly, sliding out a letter in my mother's hand, laminated for protection, Exhibit C. A written testament urging her daughter never to delegate financial authority without cause. It aligns directly with Ivy Hart's intent to preserve her inheritance, and it underscores the bad faith attempt to override her wishes. Giles cleared his throat, but Alexis turned on him like a hawk. "And Giles Mercer. Shall I explain how your success fees appear in 3 prior estate transfers, all using the same template, all under Elise Hart's direction, because my investigator has receipts. Literal ones." The notary pushed his chair back an inch, nervous. I can't authorize this signing. Not under these conditions. I'm suspending the session." I leaned forward, finally letting the mask slip. My voice was steady cold. "For weeks you thought I couldn't hear. You mocked me. You plotted to strip my mother's house out from under me. You called me naive. Furniture. Dead weight. But I heard it all. Every whisper. Every lie. And now so does everyone else." Ethan's face crumpled. "Ivy, please. I didn't want this. Elise. Don't you dare." Elise snapped, whipping toward him. "You were part of this. Every step." Giles muttered something about misunderstanding, but Alexis cut in. "Save it for the judge. You'll both be receiving formal notice within the week. Civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, attempted coercion. It won't be pretty." The room crackled with silence again, but this time I owned it. The pen still sat in my hand, hovering above the line. Slowly, deliberately, I set it down, not signed, not tainted. Just laid to rest like a weapon refused. I stood, pushing the chair back with a scrape. Naomi rose with me, her presence like a shield at my back. Alexis gathered the evidence, her heels clicking sharp across the tile. Elise slammed a fist on the table. "You think this ends here? You think you can humiliate me?" I turned, met her eyes, and smiled coldly. "This isn't humiliation. This is exposure. You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the light." For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then the notary reached for his stamp, sealing the cancellation across the top of Elise's pristine document. The ink bled red across the page like a wound. I walked out without looking back. The air outside, sharp with autumn, my chest light for the first time in months. Naomi squeezed my arm once Alexis smirked like a wolf, and the sound of the city felt like a chorus. For the first time since the accident, I didn't dread noise. I welcomed it. Inside, Elise and Giles scrambled to gather their papers, Ethan sinking into a chair like the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. But that was their silence to choke on now. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Alexis filed motions to freeze every pending transfer Elise had touched. Court letters stamped with urgency landed in mailboxes. Malik's report circulated like wildfire among investigators. What Elise thought was a private game had become a public case file. Ethan tried to talk to me the night after the notary ambush. He showed up at the townhouse kitchen, hair disheveled, voice raw. "Ivy, I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt you." I thought I cut him off with a glance. "You thought I was deaf. You thought I was blind to you. But I was listening, and now the law is too." He crumpled into a chair, hands clasped, whispering, "I love you." The words rang hollow, a faded echo of something he once meant. I left him there with his love the same way he'd left me with silence. Elise raged. She sent me 3 emails in one night, all variations of fury and denial. "You've ruined everything. You don't understand how business works." "This isn't over." I forwarded them to Alexis without reading past the first line. Each word she wrote was another nail in her own coffin. Giles tried diplomacy. He called my cell, his voice smooth as if nothing had happened. "We can negotiate. We can reach an arrangement without dragging everyone through court." I let the silence stretch, then said calmly, "The arrangement is already made. It's called justice." And I hung up. The house on Bainbridge became my sanctuary again. Naomi ferried over with bags of groceries, and together we cleared cobwebs, scrubbed wood floors, let the windows breathe. One evening, as the sun bled pink across the Sound, we sat on the porch swing with mugs of tea. The swing creaked, the boards groaned, and for once those sounds didn't weigh me down, they lifted me. I pulled out the old wooden box my mother left me. Inside, beneath, folded papers and the lemon cake recipe card was another envelope I hadn't opened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, my late father-in-law's careful formal. My breath caught. Why had my mother tucked this here? I slid the letter out. It was brief, but heavy, a note about trust funds, about Giles Mercer, about debts owed, and favors exchanged. A warning written years ago, sealed away until now. My skin prickled. Elise wasn't just greedy. Giles wasn't just complicit. There was history here, a deeper rot running through the Hart family. I set the letter back carefully, my pulse racing. The battle I'd just fought was only one chapter. Something larger still loomed. That night I lay in the farmhouse bedroom, the ocean air curling through the open window. I thought of Ethan's broken expression, Elise's fury, Giles's slippery words. They had tried to break me by calling me weak, deaf furniture, but I was none of those things. I was my mother's daughter. I was every lesson she had scrawled in ink and pressed into my hands. I whispered into the dark. "You were right, Mom. Good lines matter, and I've drawn mine." For the first time, the silence in the house didn't suffocate me. It felt chosen. Mine. But as I drifted to sleep, I couldn't ignore the echo of my father-in-law's warning. This wasn't finished. Elise and Giles had been playing a longer game than I'd realized, and if they thought I would fade back into silence, they were wrong. Because silence, I had learned, can be the sharpest weapon, and I wasn't done using it. I wake before dawn, now the Bainbridge house glowing pale in the first light. My desk faces the water blueprints, spread across it my own projects again, not theirs. Each line I draw feels like reclaiming breath. Naomi stops by with coffee, Alexis calls with updates, and for the first time I don't feel alone in the fight. This isn't just survival, it's starting over, and I know the story isn't finished. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe and stay with me, because the silence they gave me, I'm turning it into fire.